In this video, we talk about Pompeii, a place that I visited for the first time many years ago, unaware of the visions that I know today, and which the studies that I made of Indian philosophy have gradually illuminated with new colors and understanding. In fact, one day, during a lesson on Indian philosophy, my professor very simply told us that the relationship between the so-called ancient Rome and the culture of India was very close, so much that both in Rome and in Pompeii there were Indian quarters inhabited by brahmins, the ancient Indian sages and priests, who taught their philosophy directly in Rome, often as selected tutors and sought-after masters. It was not for nothing that Alexander the Great had tried to bring a gymnosophist he met in Gandhara from his expedition to India, and it is not for nothing that in Pompeii there is a very famous mosaic dedicated to Alexander the Great. My professor also told us that in the Gabinetto Segreto, a secret section of the National Archaeological Museum of Naples, where you can find specific erotic and sexual collections of objects from Roman time, there is also a statue of the Indian goddess Lakshmi, found right in a villa in Pompeii. The cabinet occupies rooms number 62 and 65 on the mezzanine floor of the museum. So let's start right here. Let's venture ourselves among the clues that strongly connect Roman culture, Pompeii in particular, to ancient Indian tantric culture. Here is the famous Lakshmi Pompeiana. Let's have a look at its own characteristics. The female figure is naked and richly adorned with jewels, flanked by two other female figures in smaller proportions. On her forehead she wears a diadem, and on her chest a rich necklace with a typical wavy shape. She wears many rings on her wrists and the ankles. Her hair is long, in a hairstyle that reaches the waist, and hair is also richly decorated. Lakshmi, wife of Vishnu, expresses the archetype of abundance, prosperity, and fecundity. First point. Is this lady really Lakshmi? The feature and accessories are in fact similar to those of Indian Lakshmi, in particular to some other Indian statues found in Afghanistan, a symptom that the communication route was very active. Let's have a look at other representations of Indian Lakshmi, where we find the same type of jewelry and necklaces. As you can see, the appearance and the waved shape of necklace and jewels are quite similar. Among other things, in this statue, Lakshmi is holding a pine cone, the same pine cone of the statues of ancient Mesopotamia, and which we will explore and discuss later in detail. Moreover, the flower on the bracelet on Tammuz's wrist is the same one found on many Indian statues. Here we see another representation of Lakshmi, who is holding circlets, which immediately remind us of the goddess Inanna. But what does official archaeology say about this specific statue, Lakshmi, found in Pompeii? The importance of the discovery was immediately perceived because, in addition to documenting the possible ship owner activity of the owner of the house, also confirmed by the discovery of some drawings of ships and graffiti in a cubicle, it shows how extensive the trade routes were to the east at the time. However, the discovery of a hole above the head would suggest a different use of the object, a handle for a toilet bowl or perhaps a support for some piece of furniture for women. There is also an inscription in Kharoshthi, an ancient North Indian language, at the base of the Pompeii statuette, the letter Sh, like Sh in Shiva. This suggests that it may have originated from the northwestern regions of India, Pakistan or Afghanistan, or at least passed through these areas. Since the Pompeii statuette was necessarily made before 79 AD, produced in Gandhara, this fact would suggest that the Bagram ivories found in Afghanistan also actually date back to this date. It appears evident that the connections between Rome and these areas were close, but really very, very close. Fact that in general is not emphasized by history books at all. We continue with another interesting element, always concerning the aspect of sexual representations, the faun and the nymph. The position of the faun's hand on the nymph's breast is very indicative, because it exactly recalls the statues of Shiva and Shakti, or Vishnu and Lakshmi, in the identical position. There are so many. Everywhere in India, it is evident that there is no need to make further comments. It is as the fresco imitated the positions of the Indian statues in the Roman style, in the Roman way. It is known that the symbol of Pompeii is the phallus. But why is the phallus the symbol of Pompeii? Because in Pompeii you can actually find phallus everywhere. When I visited Pompeii for the first time, the guide told me quite superficially that phalluses were an indication of brothels. But phalluses are really everywhere, even on the streets, in private houses. So maybe Pompeii was a city made up only of warehouses. Some scholars tell about the city whose inhabitants used to adore Priapus, the son of Dionysus, and were lascivious and obscene. They used to pray to unbridled Dionysian rites. But was it really like that? How could such a beautiful, thriving, harmonious and prosperous city be able to exist and develop abundance for such a long time? Perhaps there is something missing in this interpretation. More likely, in my personal opinion, the phalluses were an integral part of a culture that lived sexuality serenely, in direct connection, as it should be, with abundance, nature, seasonal cycles, with fertility, in short, as a natural part of the human experience, without obscenity, without shame, and without hiding it, as is the case today, instead, to better control people. Sexuality is the most powerful energy possessed by a human being. It is not for nothing that we are capable of creating a new life, of being co-creators. It seems that in Pompeii, as still nowadays in Bhutan, for example, the phallus was used precisely to educate people about something that is part of life: coupling, copulation. Even today in Bhutan, we find the colored phalluses displayed in full view on the doors of the houses. And these images do not transmit any kind of obscene or offensive effect to us. But, on the contrary, they transmit the presence and memory of the sacred parts of our body that are responsible of creation of a new life and transformation. The more coupling and sex become forbidden, hidden, private, the more it becomes obscene, shameful, aggressive, unnatural, sick. On the culture of sexuality in India. In addition to the well-known Kama Sutra, which everyone knows, we also have the tantric rituals of Maituna. And furthermore, the extraordinary representations of the Indian temple of Khajuraho. And the temple of the Yoginis of Chausat. Let's remember that Tantra was born, just like a recent philosophy in India, to help the human beings to cross the Kali Yuga, the age of deep materialism. The great masters wanted to give a very powerful means of awareness, and it is no coincidence that it is connected in the school of the left hand with sexual energy. To remain vigilant observers even in the darkness of the storm of ignorance of our age. Together with the Phallus, we also combine the representations of Pompeii with an erotic background, which are really many, and can be found again in the secret cabinet of the Archaeological Museum of Naples, and the famous frescoes of the female Dionysiac initiations of the Villa dei Misteri, the Mystery Villa, which have been strongly modified in the more explicit details concerning the phallic symbols by the restorations. These wonderful places are the keys to have a more complete vision about the culture of Pompeii. A new lararium was recently discovered, but there are many also inside the Thermopolium, the restaurants. The last one was excavated and cleaned only recently, and here we find clearly all the symbols of abundance, fertility, sexual energy, duality, rebirth, kundalini, fractals. Lararium was a sacred space inside the villa, dedicated to rituals for burning offers and praying, like inside the houses of India, even nowadays. Still exists the space of the sacred fire. The word lararium comes from lares, the protectors of the house and family. So a new lararium was recently excavated and cleaned, and here we can find clearly all the symbols of abundance, fertility, sexual energy, duality, rebirth, kundalini, fractals. We observe the snake, we observe the pine cone, we observe the egg, all typical symbols of India too. The guardian snakes, as the kundalini, with long convoluted tails, are just on the two sides of the vertical votive column, on which we can find the eggs or the offers or the gaiomarts, symbols connected with the goddess of snake and the Zoroastrianism. And in the center, the pine cone, the great symbol of ignition, of universal energy, of life, which we find, not for nothing, just in the Vatican. But are they really snakes? And what kind? It seems that they have evident gills on the sides of their faces, and they don't seem aggressive at all. On the contrary, they appear very nice and protective. Perhaps the so-called ancient Romans had a very deep knowledge of ethology, of snakes and reptiles, which we do not consider, or rather they represented a kind of axolotl, which also has the same pleasant smile, or in any case a member of the Serenidae family, a salamander, or an amphibian anyway, a half reptile, an asexual border being. Or they are more kind of dragons, like the snakes of Medea, another kind of serpent sorceress, whose meat comes from Colchid after the Black Sea. So these serpents have a double crest on the head and under the chin, like dragons. On the other hand, the serpent is also inside the symbol of Asclepius, son of Apollo. In Latin it was called Aesculapius. And around the neck of Shiva in India we find also snakes. In Chaldean and Arabic etymology, the words for serpent and life have a clear synergy. In classical Greece, the agathos daimon was literally the noble spirit, a personal companion spirit, ensuing health and good fortune. And the Caduceus, with two intertwined snakes, also refers us to Hermes, and therefore to Hermaphroditus, son of Hermes and Aphrodite, a bisexual being. Therefore, once again, we go back to the idea of coupling as the human means to return to a unique original state, not separate, undivided, beyond the artificial polarity of human life. See also the descriptions of love from Plato's Phedone in this regard. A few brief words on the pine cone. The activator, the attractor, the fractal, all is placed in the center between the two snakes on the top of the caduceus, or on the top of the column. The pine cone is undoubtedly connected to the rites of Delphi in Greece, where it was called Omphalos, Phallus, the origin of life. Again derived from the activation rituals of ancient Mesopotamia, where the so-called Tree of Life was created in the shape of a kind of symmetrical network from which the Sephiroth then derives, both more similar to an electric grid than to a tree, which was activated, inseminated through the pine cone. And finally the column altar that perfectly resembled the lingam of India, which was perhaps placed in the empty niches of the lararium in the form of a phallus. In any case, it does not seem appropriate to venture that in Pompeii there was a lascivious and obscene civilization. On the contrary, the cultural level was certainly very much advanced. If there are any doubts left, let's take a look at the thermopoliums, the restaurants and taverns of Pompeii, where nowadays we can find perfect Indian-type tandoor ovens. Today still there in front of our eyes. One last curiosity. In Micronesia, there is a place called Pompeii. Incredible assonance of the name. Could it be only a coincidence? Where an ancient, ultra-developed civilization was born, with a lagoon city divided into little islands, of which today we can find the majestic ruins of immense megalithic temples, built entirely in stones, very huge stones, and then destroyed by a cataclysm. A fairly similar story, whose origin and construction cannot be explained except through the use of advanced technologies. It is even said that this was the famous continent, lost continent Mu. So, thank you so much for following the story of Pompeii up to here. The advanced civilizations of the world certainly had a common origin, and Pompeii is a proof of this prosperous past.